The Truth About Goblins. Chapter 31.
"What?" exclaimed Saphira. "Go back? You can't mean it."
"I have to see what happened for myself," said Timothy. "You should all stay here in the meantime." He stood in the doorway of the cottage, one foot already on the deck. The other three were staring at him from the living room.
"You can't leave us here alone," said Annie. "What if something happens? What if the killer comes back?"
"He won't."
He said it with enough authority to keep them quiet, though uncertainty hung over the room like a cloud.
"And I won't be long. Just sit tight and I'll be back before you know it."
But Saphira was at his side in an instant. "You can't go out on your own. It isn't safe." He paused a long moment.
"You're right," he said. "You stay here, look after Kit. Annie will lead me back to the cabin."
Saphira was about to answer when he clasped her shoulder. Something like bitterness tugged at the edge of his lips.
"You've done enough for one night," he said.
And then, in a softer tone,
"You've seen enough."
Defeated, she pulled away. Timothy gestured to Annie, and despite the looks she cast at the shadows outside, she felt better being at his side. "It's across the creek," she said, before he could ask. 10 minutes, maybe?" He nodded, grabbing a lantern as he followed her out the door. A last glance towards Saphira, and he closed it behind him. She turned back and made her way to the couch. "He's cross with me," a long sigh. "And he has every right to be." Kit eyed her as she took a seat next to him.
"I wouldn't be so tough on myself if I were you. I mean, it was our fault too."
"Only because I asked you for help." She covered her face with her hands. "I'm so sorry, Kit. You and Annie have been nothing but kind, and all I've done is get you two into trouble."
"Hey now," he said,
patting her back somewhat awkwardly.
"You think I'd let you take all the credit? It was my idea to follow you into the mines, you know. And you didn't exactly invite us over here."
He laughed, trying to lighten the mood.
"And don't forget you took a bullet for me, getting that antidote. You really helped me out, big time."
She forced a smile. "I'm glad you think so."
"Think so? I know so. Imagine what would have happened if I had walked in there, pulled up to Grimm's slimy face, and—"
His words trailed off into silence. Saphira waited for him to finish, but he didn't. "What is it?" He got to his feet, searching his pockets.
"Where did I put them?"
"Put what?"
"The glasses."
Finding nothing, he turned to her.
"What did I do with the glasses?"
Startled, it took her a moment to answer. I think you gave them to Timothy, didn't you? Why are you—"
"Did they look familiar?"
He grabbed her shoulders.
"You must have seen them before, right?"
"Kit!"
"They looked exactly like—"
"Stop!" She pushed his hands away and rose from the couch. "I know what you're going to say, but you're jumping to conclusions. Those glasses could belong to anyone."
"No, think about it. They were thick, with thin frames. Gold or something. No, definitely gold. They had to be his."
She took him by the arm and led him back to the couch. "Kit, you have to calm down. You don't know what you're saying."
"I know exactly what I'm saying."
He shook her off.
"We need to tell Timothy as soon as he gets back."
She gasped. No, don't tell him, Kit. Please don't tell him."
"Why not? If Grimm killed that woman, he might be connected to everything else. Timothy's gotta know."
"You don't understand. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. Please, you have to promise not to tell him."
I don't have to do anything.
He crossed his arms.
He's gotta know.
She looked away, wringing her hands. You wouldn't say that if you knew the whole story.
Wait, what?
He eyed her suspiciously.
There's more?
A long pause. She nodded. And then he groaned.
Fantastic. More secrets?
If I tell you, will you promise not to tell Timothy about the glasses?
That doesn't sound fair,
he said, reluctant.
What if it's not a good enough reason?
You'll just have to trust me. This time she crossed her arms. Not that I would hold you to your promise. I'll have to trust you too. They both stared at one another. It was a long while before Kit gave in.
Okay,
he said.
I promise not to tell, but this better be good.
She shook her head. It's not. Kit, I'm sorry, but it's terrible, and much more dangerous than I was willing to admit. The few seconds outside the cabin were the longest Annie had ever experienced. Cold, alone, waiting for Timothy to come back. She was desperate enough to consider going after him by the time he finally made it back out. She caught his gaze, but he said nothing. What was there to say? He closed the door behind him, gestured for her to follow, and led the way with the lantern in hand. Annie kept close, glancing back at the old cabin long after it had passed out of sight. The trees themselves seemed to take malevolent shapes. Each bush posed a threat for the hiding place it offered. She cursed under her breath as she tripped over a root. A twig snapped. She gasped. Timothy pulled her close.
Raccoons,
he said, waving his lantern.
They won't bother us.
She caught the gleam of their beady eyes before they scurried away. Embarrassed, she released his arm. Sorry. He gave something like a chuckle and wrapped his arm around her shoulders.
Don't worry, there's nothing out here to be afraid of.
He looked to the distance and sighed.
Not anymore.
It was strange how different he looked. She tried to remember when they had first met, in the tea shop, before the mines and the secret and the talk at the cabin. But she couldn't reimagine that first impression, the sort of timidity that had made him seem so young. The lantern swayed in his hand, casting shadows across an expression that belonged to someone else, a different face than the one she had seen in the tea shop. The gentle features she remembered were worn down with worry. He caught her staring.
What is it?
Sorry, she said again, looking away. Feeling the weight of his gaze, she tried to fill the silence. It's just you look like you care about him a lot. He stopped.
What?
Their eyes met in the dark. I just meant that you look worried. He kept staring. Had she said something wrong? I'm sorry, I shouldn't have.
Oh.
He relaxed suddenly.
You mean my son? Worried for my son?
Well, yeah. They started walking again. Who else would I be talking about? Right, the killer. She shivered, clinging to his arm again. He didn't seem to mind. It was almost like he was used to it, leading the way, being the adult, the parent. She was envious. How do you do it? She asked.
Do what?
She paused. She had asked the question without understanding it. What you do. What we're doing now. She got the courage to look back up at him. Aren't you scared? He seemed nervous, at the very least.
Annie, is there something you're trying to tell me?
If there was, she didn't know how to say it. I guess I'm just trying to figure things out, you know? I mean, he's only a baby, but you love him, right? She waited for him to stop her, but he didn't. Is it just a human thing? Do you think maybe that goblins ever feel that way? It was a long time before he answered.
I really don't know.
She felt his eyes on her, could almost hear his thoughts as he stopped to think too. It took a while for her to break the silence again. Would you ever give him up? He pulled away from her, saying nothing. If you thought that, maybe, it would be better for him, that your son would be happier or safer in another place, would you send him away? She couldn't see his face. It scared her. Would you?
Annie.
His voice was almost a moan.
Where is this coming from?
She didn't know, and he didn't have an answer. They fell back into silence and kept walking. The shadows, the exhaustion, the mental stress of the night had worn them both down. The sight of the cottage was a relief. The lights and voices from inside put them at ease as they mounted the deck and slid the door open. But there was tension as they entered. Timothy looked to the other two, his eyes meeting Saphira's. She didn't say a word, and neither did Kit, but their expressions were enough. He moaned.
Saphira.
He had to know, she said, too quick to be apologetic. And Annie should know too. Know what? Said Annie. She watched as Timothy collapsed in an armchair. What's going on?
You should have asked me beforehand,
he muttered, his eyes still on Saphira.
It wasn't your secret to tell.
This time, she really did look sorry. But Annie noticed something else when she looked to Kit. He was nervous. What's going on? She repeated. What were you guys talking about? Silence, hesitation. Saphira looked to Timothy.
Go on,
he said, waving his hand.
You've gone and told him. Might as well let her in on it too.
She shrank from him. You're angry with me.
Yes.
He caught her gaze.
What you've done is beyond reckless. You've been thoughtless and dragged your friends into all this. None of you should have been here tonight.
There were tears in her eyes. She looked at her feet. I'm sorry,
Wait.
Kit stepped in front of her.
It's my fault. I made her tell me. I wouldn't leave her alone. If you want to blame someone, blame me.
And if we're pointing fingers, Annie took her place beside him. It was my idea to meet you in the woods. Saphira didn't invite us or anything, so it's my fault too. She glanced over her shoulder. Saphira was stunned, and Timothy didn't know what to say.
Goodness.
He covered his face with his hands.
I'm a villain.
Saphira stepped around her friends and knelt at his side. I'm sorry, Timothy. You're right. I've been reckless, and I wasn't thinking straight about any of this. She took his hand. I can't expect you to forgive me. Something of a smile resurfaced.
There's nothing to forgive. What you've seen tonight it's enough. And you're right, too.
He looked at Annie.
I think it's time for an explanation.
Kit fell back on the couch. Annie followed. But Saphira stayed by Timothy.
I don't really know how to say it, he admitted, looking at her.
She caught his meaning and continued for him, turning to the couch. There's someone else. Annie frowned. What do you mean, there's someone else? Someone else is after the baby, said Kit quietly. She looked at Kit, Saphira, and then to Timothy. What? A magician, said Timothy. Ruthless and powerful. The arbiters have proved useless against him. That's not entirely true, said Saphira. Donovan was able to interfere. He saved Timothy's son from the kidnapper. Stumbled across him, more like, he muttered. In any case, she continued, his son is safe, hidden. Donovan was able to get him out of the magician's reach. You know the guy who has your baby right now. Annie stared at him. Why can't you get him back? It's not that simple, he said. Everything depends on secrecy. That woman in the cabin, she was my contact. Donovan's contact. I see now that this magician has been watching me closer than I suspected. If I make one false move... He gave another moan. I suppose I already have, waiting like this. Like an idiot. Don't talk like that, said Saphira. This isn't the end. Donovan won't come to the market if he knows he's in danger. He'll let you know some other way. She looked back to Kit and Annie. And we won't say a word to anyone. Until I saw that woman, I didn't think. She took both his hands. I'm sorry. We risked everything going out there tonight. You were only doing what you thought was right. He looked to the couch. I'm sorry any of you had to see that. But Annie wasn't listening. The woman. Do you think the killer was that magician? His silence was enough of an answer. She looked at Kit, but despite the look in his eye, he didn't offer anything more. She sunk back into the couch. This is crazy. I'll say, muttered Kit. What time is it? Said Saphira. When can we go home? Another hour yet, said Timothy, looking at his watch. By then the sun will have risen, and we can head back through the forest. He scratched his head. By the way, how did you two get here so quickly? It took us nearly all day to walk through the woods. Shortcuts, said Kit, pulling out the old map from his pocket. I think we must have cut at least 3 hours of walking. Saphira eyed the map. Can't we take the road back? I would feel much safer out in the open rather than going through the forest again. Kit interrupted Timothy before he could reply. Can't use the road, he said. Not since the landslide. It's all buried, right up to the mountain on the far side of the woods. It won't be dangerous once it's light out, said Timothy. And if we take advantage of these shortcuts, we'll be home in no time. I hope so, said Annie, still in a daze. The sooner we get home, the better. He took a deep breath and got to his feet. I'm sure we're all quite tired. Why don't you three try to grab some sleep before we shove off? We still have an hour to go. But no one jumped at the chance for a nap. Heck, said Kit. I don't think I'm ever sleeping again. Hey, hi, I'm your narrator, Miranda Eastwood, also the author of The Truth About Goblins. If you liked this chapter, remember to add, follow, or subscribe to this channel so you can hear the next one. And if you didn't like this chapter, oh well, I can't really do anything about that. In any case, I just thought I'd let you know about my Patreon. You can check it out if you'd like to throw some support my way. It would mean a lot to me. Not to mention there's loads of extra exclusive content that I only post on Patreon. While I'm at it, I'll mention that The Truth About Goblins is now available as a complete audiobook, and you can get it wherever you get your audiobooks. Thanks for listening.